Hey there, welcome back. Okay, we are still looking at the typography for our imaginary book cover. So far, we have typeset the front cover panel, as you can see here. What we're going to do next is set the back cover and the spine, and then we'll add any remaining elements that might be necessary. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to open up the text folder and open up the front cover. And we're going to do our spine first, so we'll open that spine. What I like to do, just to ensure that we're not losing track of um, any of the font colors, details, proportions, anything like that, is instead of creating a new type layer and then trying to duplicate the effects, I'll actually duplicate the entire type layer from the front cover and then adjust it to fit the spine. So in this case, we're going to take the title and we're going to take the author. And I selected both of those by clicking and holding Shift. So you can use Shift to select another one, and you can use Command to unselect. I'm going to hold down the Option key, and I'm going to duplicate by dragging those two folders into the spine folder. Now that we've done that, we don't need the title or author folder that exist here, so I'm going to just select those and hit delete on the keyboard. So now we have a duplicate of the title and author. You can see as I drag those that they just pulled them right over as is. I'm going to start with the title. So the way that I do this is I'm going to just select all of the layers that are in that folder. Again, click and hold Shift to select the entire layers. Click, hold Shift, click again at the bottom layer. That'll select everything in between. I'm going to do a free transform, which is Command T, and that will select all of the title layers that exist here. And if I click outside of the transform box, you'll see the rotation arrows. We're going to click while holding Shift, and then just drag to the right. And holding Shift is going to make the jump here in 45-degree increments, so that when you finally arrive at a perfect vertical, you can just hit Enter and you've done it. Now, there are a couple of things you might not be able to see here that we're going to have to adjust besides just the novel's or the title's size, but we'll get into that in just a moment. For now, we're going to select the two title layers, Can't Go and Home, as well as the texture layers that are applied to them. So Command click those to select them. And then we're just going to free transform those. So hit Command T and hold down Shift while you click and drag the anchor at the edge. That's going to allow you to scale down the size of the type. That looks like it might be close, maybe a little large, but we're going to drag that over here and see. Now you'll notice the inner blue lines here represent the safe area on the spine. So our text is still a bit too big. So again, Shift, click, drag. And I think that might work, so let's hit Enter. And we'll drag that in there. Look, we've got a little bit of room to spare. I'm going to leave that room there just because it's nice and safe to do so. Now, you can do things on the spine that are different from the type on the front cover. For example, we could actually set the entire thing in one long sentence at the same font size. But I kind of like the treatment that we have here. It feels kind of nice. And it gives us some room to play with the author name and the words a novel without dipping into this difficult background here, which might be hard for us to place type over and make sure that it's readable. So we've gone ahead and set the title there. I want to show you the differences the adjustments we're going to have to make. So here on the front cover, if you remember, we set some simple effects so that across the top of the letters, there's a very subtle bevel, like so, and we have a gradient that moves from bottom to top. While over here, you'll notice that the bevel is still sitting on the north portion of the letters, which means that it's not actually sitting on top of the letter like it should. So we're going to have to adjust the degrees of our effects. This is very simple. So we'll double click the layer to open up the layer style palette. under bevel and emboss, we're going to change the angle to 0. And let's go ahead and hit enter, and that actually moves the bevel to the top edge of the letters. The other thing we want to do is change the gradient overlay to 0, like so. Because while it's difficult to tell, because we have the cloud layer over the top of these letters, our gradient was still going vertically, and now we actually need to go horizontally to follow the pattern we established on the cover. So we're going to duplicate these layers, these layer effects, onto the can't go text. So if you hold Option, click the FX, and drag, then release, that will duplicate the effects here. So that's all we had to worry about there. Now our title is set properly on the spine. We're going to move the words "a novel" over here. Now, there are a couple of different ways we could place this. I'm going to just eyeball it here and have it vertically centered, or horizontally centered between the safe zones here. But I'm actually going to scale the type down just a little bit more for the spine. It's not quite as important here, and I don't want it to distract from the balance that we've created up here. So we're going to float that here for now. Now the remaining type, of course, is the author. So the exact same thing we did before. Command-T, click and rotate while holding Shift. Now we're going to bring the author over here. Now, of course, he's way too large now that we've sized the type down for our title. So we're going to scale him as well. You can hold down Shift and Alt at the same time to scale towards the center. I'm pretty happy with that, so we're going to position it right about there. We're going to go into the layer styles like before, change the angle to 0 on both the gradient overlay and the bevel and emboss. And voila, we have our spine. That was pretty simple. Now, in some cases, you don't even need a novel on the spine. It's present on the cover. It doesn't necessarily need to be present on the spine. I'm going to turn it off. I actually like how that looks just a bit better. And we're going to close up the spine and call it good. Other things that you might want to set on a spine, if you have, let's say, your own publishing imprint for your novel, or if you're actually designing this cover for a publisher, then you would be applying a new layer. We're just going to call this logo. And this would be a file that you're importing from elsewhere, but I'm just going to use a simple circle for now. And let's pretend that represents the publishing logo. Let's say that's Carver Publishing or something. You would end up placing that logo in the very familiar position down here. Maybe a little bit smaller than that. And often something like that would have some type associated with it. So we'll create a new type layer. We'll enjoy our spinning beach ball for a moment. We'll call it Carver Press. Let's set that on white. You'll find that most publishing imprints are going to be set in solid black or solid white. Occasionally that's not the case. Just for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to set it in white. Way too big, so we're going to bring that way down. And let's position that right here below our fake logo. Now, if you remember the guidelines down here and the way that these are cut, the bottom line represents the outside bleed. The middle line, this is our dashed line. This is where they're going to cut the cover. So this next line here is basically your safe zone. You don't want to go past it. So we're in perfectly good real estate here with that logo. The logo is still a bit big, so I'm going to scale that a tiny bit, like so. And now that feels pretty good. Let's zoom out. There you go. Starting to look nice and professional already. All right. You might be wondering, by the way, when I looked at these lines down here, what this fourth line is. Let me turn off our art layers just so you can see the shapes here. Right here, we've got lines that form a rectangle. This rectangle is where the UPC code will go if you're designing for a CreateSpace template, which is what we've used here. So this line represents the top of that barcode. Of course, these two lines are the sides. The fourth line here is just the line for the bottom of the barcode. It's not meant to be representative of the bottom of the page design or the cover design. All right, let's turn everything back on. All right, so the last thing we're going to do is set the back cover text. Again, we're going to duplicate because that's the simplest way to go. I'm going to put those into a folder really quickly, call it logo. We're going to duplicate because we don't want to lose things. So I want a headline on the back cover. I want another blurb, and I want some body text explaining what's going on here. We might also look at setting an author bio. We can do that. A lot of books have it, a lot of books don't, so it's not necessary either way. Let's see where we get with this first. So we're going to duplicate our blurb quote, first of all, from the front cover to the back cover. Let's hold down Option, click, and drag. We can delete the empty folder that's there now. And we're going to drag this new one over. Let's turn on our markers. It looks actually pretty well centered entirely by accident. So I'm not going to bother changing the text. We'll just pretend for the sake of argument that this is a different blurb from the one you see on the front cover. And let's go ahead and work on a headline. Now I like to echo the major typeface of the front cover in a headline on the back cover. So I'm going to borrow the words can't go. So I'm going to go into the title folder, grab can't go and the cloud texture. Click Option and drag to duplicate those, and we're going to put them into the headline folder under back cover. Now we can just drag that over. This is of course much too large for a headline, so we're going to do a little bit of scaling here just on the text, not the cloud layer. So we're going to bring this down. That feels pretty good. And for the moment, let's leave it right here in this pale area so we can read it. And let's write up a quick headline. And set this to left align as well, so that it doesn't go floating off the page while we're typing. And now we've got a headline. That's still a bit big, so I'm bringing it down a bit. And actually change that type to just 14 even. Nice squared off number. Okay, now at that size the bevel feels a little bit harsh, so I'm going to open our layer effects. I'm going to go to the bevel layer, and I'm going to take the opacity of that down to about 40. So the bevel's still present, but it's much more subtle. And let's see, if we were to turn off the gradient overlay, then we still get a sense of color. The reason I'm doing that is because at that size of gradient overlay can sometimes overpower the readability of the type. Now let's see with the cloud layer if it actually adds anything at this size. My guess is that it won't. It's actually going to just feel like we have a bunch of strange errors with text color here. And that's kind of what it feels like. It almost feels like a gradient layer in itself. So I'm going to turn, actually I'm going to throw away that cloud texture layer, and we're just going to go with a very simple, solid color, slightly beveled font for that headline. Okay, now I'm going to create our body text. So in doing this, I don't necessarily want to duplicate anything, because creating body text means we're setting up a full paragraph of text, and we can always borrow the font after we start doing that, but we want to draw an outline. So we're going to go into the description folder, then we're going to choose our text tool, and then click and drag to create a rectangle. And our text is going to live in here. Now we've got the right font still. We're going to set that to Beltham Book, and we're going to drop it down to, let's say, 7. We'll see how that feels. It might be a little difficult to read, so I'm going to go with medium instead of book. And I want the color to remain the same just so it's readable against this background. Now we need some fake text to drop in here, so I am going to show you a website that I love. It's lipsum.com, and this will bring us to a page where you can generate some placeholder text. You just select how many paragraphs you want or words and hit generate. It will give you all of this text here. Now, of course, that's way too much for our back cover, so I like to just grab a paragraph and copy it. And then I'll come over here into Photoshop and paste it in. Now, you can already see we've got to do some work here with our line height and perhaps with the font sizing as well. So let's start with the line height. Right now, 76 is incredibly high, so we're going to go to 12. And that brings a lot of it into visibility here. Excuse me. And let's zoom out, get a nice clean look at that. I'm going to take a sip of water here, just pardon me. Okay, I'm actually kind of happy with that font size. That feels good. I like to go with a justified layout for text on the back. So in the paragraph palette, you'll see you have all these different alignment options. Justified with a dangling final line is the one that I like to choose. I don't even know what you call that. Is it Tony? Justify last left. Look at that, we learned something there. Okay, now most body descriptions like this are not going to be a single huge unbroken paragraph. So I'm going to click in here and just add a couple of line breaks in between a couple of these. And that feels pretty good. Now you can see there's some hyphenation going on here. You can select with Command A, you can select the entire text and turn off hyphenation. And you'll see that now the words wrap properly from line to line, but sometimes that will create some weird large gaps in the spacing between the words. You can see it a little bit better there. So I'm going to keep hyphenation turned on. All you'll want to look out for is that you're not hyphenating too many words and that you're not hyphenating words awkwardly. Because Photoshop is really just going to do some very, very basic hyphenation logic. It's not necessarily going to know if it's hyphenating in the right place. So use your judgment for that. Now we have our description. I like to, let's see, if we were to align that with the left of the Y, I'd like to indent it. So I'm holding down Shift and using the right arrow key with the text layer selected over here just to do some simple nudging until I'm happy with where things live. Now we've got this sort of difficult space right here in terms of readability, but I don't necessarily want to drag the description too far down on the back cover. Now, if there were more of these blurbs, let's say 4 or 5 blurbs spaced out up here, maybe this would make sense. But otherwise, this feels like a very, very large empty space to me. And so I'd like to actually keep our text floating somewhere in this space, which means this is hard to read. So one of our tricks we can do is opening up the layer effects. We're going to set an outer glow just on this text right here. And the outer glow, I think, should probably pick up some of our background color. It should have a slight spread percentage, let's say 2, and the size can go up just a bit to help things be a little bit more readable over that image. Now it's also a little bit strong. You can see that outline very heavily, so we're going to bring the opacity down just a bit. And I think that might be enough to kind of dim that blood and help it read. If it's not, you can always play with this a bit more. One other thing you can do is add a very subtle drop shadow to the text that is set at a very close size to the text and in a very light color. Sometimes that can help. Now I'm just quickly setting this up as an example. I'm not going to keep that. If I were to zoom in on the text now, you can see how there's a nice tight drop shadow right there that would actually help the text stand out just a little bit more. And it's really only visible over darker backgrounds. Everywhere else it's kind of invisible. So that actually could kind of help. I'm going to consider leaving that. It's a little bit harsh, so I'm going to drop the opacity just a bit more. And we'll keep that in place. Okay, so now we've got our back cover with another blurb. We've got our headline and description. Sometimes if you have like a nice punchy line to end on, you might even duplicate the headline and maybe float it over here. And we'll change that to something that sounds a little bit more punchy. After all, home is where the heart was. That's suitably cheesy, don't you think? Okay. In fact, I don't really like it. We're going to just take out the after all, and we'll stick with that. All right, I never said that this imaginary book was a quality book, so don't hold me accountable for these off-the-cuff, terrible things I'm writing. Okay, now I'm going to nudge all this around a bit to horizontally center it. And the more I look at it, the more I don't like the way that the text overlaps that blood, so I'm going to nudge it down here again. I'm going to offset it by duplicating our blurb. We'll have a couple of these floating up here. And again, I've done this for a while. I'm just kind of eyeballing where I put things. If you want to measure things, you can certainly do that. Under the View menu, there's also this feature called Snap that will allow you to snap different objects to guidelines or to measure distances between things. You can certainly do any of that, and that will help you finalize it. Now, the last thing that's going to appear on this back cover, of course, is the barcode. You don't have to worry about that if you're publishing to CreateSpace. They'll actually apply the barcode for you. So I'm not going to add anything more to this back cover. Like I mentioned before, you could add, say, an author photo or a bio. We've already got quite a bit of space consumed here with just this simple information. So I'm not going to try to cram an author bio into this corner here. But you could if you wanted to. Sometimes if you want to make the book feel just a little bit more legit, especially if it's a self-published book and you want people to not get that self-published feel from it, you might add other pieces of content like the category that the book might be shelved in at a bookstore or in a library. So you might add the word fiction. You might add the price, although I don't recommend that just because if you are experimenting with price, then having a price on the book cover actually can present a little bit of a challenge for a reader if the price fluctuates. So there are other things that you might add. You don't necessarily have to have them. And sometimes you'll find on the back cover, if you do have a publishing logo, you might echo that here for the sake of completion. And just so it's always evident to someone that this is produced through an imprint. But I'm going to turn it off in this case. So now we are effectively done. This is our book cover. And we've set the front cover, the spine, the back cover. All the text is independent of our art layer, as you can see here, and it's independent of our filter layer. So let's turn it off. We still have our filtered cover, and then beneath that we still have the original art layers. One thing you can do, and one thing I've done in the past, is when you apply your visual filters to the cover, you can do so. I'll just show you very quickly. You can do so by filtering both the text and the art together. I'm going to duplicate these to a new layer just to show you that if you run these Instagram filters on all of it at once, you'll end up with something that still feels pretty well put together. In some cases, you might actually be happier with how it looks when you do it this way. The reason that I don't always do it is that, very simply, when I design a book cover for an author, it's very often the case that they have changes to text here, or maybe they've changed their title, they want to add a blurb, things like that. If I have to continually regenerate the entire cover when text changes. It becomes a very painstaking process. So in this case, because it's separate, I can simply come into the file, edit the text, and then re-export it, and we're done. So that's it. We are typeset. And I'm going to wrap it up here, but stay tuned for the next post when we'll talk about how to export your files and prepare them for publication. And that will be the end of our series with that post. So be sure to stick around, and thanks for watching.